Lots and lots of students struggle with the idea of fuel cells that you need for GCSE chemistry. So I'm just going to do a quick run through of of this process. So the idea is that fuel cells could be used to generate electrical energy and maybe power things like cars instead of burning petrol. The problem, of course, with burning petrol is that it generates carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, and that is linked to climate change. Now, if hydrogen is used as a fuel, in a fuel cell, we generate electrical energy directly from the chemical reaction between hydrogen and oxygen to produce water. If you to take hydrogen and oxygen and react them together, so you light them with a match, you get a big bang and we generate water. Now it's really important to have a clear idea of the overall reaction here and recognise that this reaction in terms of environmental chemistry is great because we're generating only water, which is of course harmless. It's not toxic and it's not going to add to the greenhouse effect. Okay, but we're not reacting them directly, we're reacting them at a distance from each other. And we've got a reaction going on at an electrode over here, we've got a reaction going on at an electrode over here. So these two things are electrodes, not drawn particularly well. I'm just going to colour those in a little bit so we can see what's going on. So the most important thing I can tell you is that we've got that overall reaction going on and that no carbon dioxide has been generated at the point of which at the point where the chemistry is going on. At the back end of the video, we'll talk about the pros and cons associated with fuel cells, and we'll talk about some of the problems associated with producing hydrogen for fuel cells. But we're going to start off by thinking about the chemistry. So you might first of all notice that we've got this electrolyte solution full of hydroxide ions. This can be done with hydrogen ions as well, but most hydrogen fuel cells have an alkaline electrolyte, which means they've got hydroxide there, and the hydroxide is passing through a membrane. So we've got a reaction happening on the surface of this electrode and a reaction happening on the surface of this electrode. Now your fuel, the hydrogen, which is stored in canisters under high pressure, is pumped in somehow onto the surface of this electrode, and the oxygen, really that's just air. We've not got an oxygen canister we're carrying around, but 21% or roughly of air is oxygen, so we're combining hydrogen with oxygen from the air. Now what's going on at each electrode? So at this electrode here, the hydrogen is being oxidized and being converted into water. Now I'm going to write out the full half equations for you sort of bit by bit. So the hydrogen is being converted into water, and we'll finish that off in a minute. That's not finished. This happens at the anode. The word anode isn't required, but you do need to know that that's the negative electrode. And at the other electrode, the positive electrode that we call the cathode here, oxygen is being converted into hydroxide ions. And those hydroxide ions travel across, so think of the oxygen being converted to hydroxide ions by virtue of those electrons that are being pushed around. So the oxygen is being reduced by those electrons, and there's some water in there. We'll see how that's used in a bit. Hydroxide ions are being produced. They travel across through the electrolyte solution here, and those hydroxide ions combine with the hydrogen to make water, water being the only byproduct coming out here. Now this reaction here, as I said, is oxidation, and the electrons that are produced are passing around that circuit, and those electrons are used to power a motor. Right? So we know that in the top reaction, hydroxide ions, we just said this, are used And to balance this equation, you're going to need 2 waters produced and 2 hydroxides. So you end up with 4 hydrogens on the left, 4 hydrogens on the right, and 2 oxygens on the left and 2 oxygens on the right. So hopefully you can see how balanced that half equation. It's not finished yet, but make sure you either learned it, which is ideal, or that you can work it out in the exam. So just practice it before the exam. It's not quite finished yet though, is it? Because there are 2 negative charges on the left, and so we need 2 negative charges on the right. Now, just like with any half equation, we put the electrons on the more positive side, so put them over there. So that's oxidation taking place with the negative electrode. The positive electrode, we know, I told you a minute ago, that oxygen and water combine to make the hydroxide ions. And the only way to make this balance and to make sense of it is if you have 2 water molecules for every 1 oxygen, and that means you get an even ratio of hydrogen to oxygen, and we need that to make hydroxide. So you've got that half equation taking place. Again, that's not quite finished, is it? We need here to have both sides having the same charge. You put the electrons on the more positive side, which is the left, and it's reduction, isn't it, because the oxygen and water have gained electrons. Specifically here, actually, that's the oxygen that's been oxidized, reduced. Now, when you combine those 2 equations together, you find you end up with this equation here. Right? That's what we end up with. I'm going to walk you through that process that you don't have to know, but I'm going to show you how we combine those 2 half equations, just so you can see that it makes sense. So feel free to skip this this next little tiny bit if you're not that bothered. But because this top reaction produces 2 electrons and the bottom reaction requires 4, we just times this whole thing by 2. We get 2 lots of H2 plus 4 lots of hydroxide plus oxygen and 2 waters and the 4 electrons. So that's everything from the left hand side just written down there. That turns into 2 lots of H2O times 2, that's 4 lots of H2O, 4 electrons, so there's the 4 waters, 4 electrons, because we times everything by 2, plus 4 hydroxide ions. And we find that we can cancel out the electrons, because that's the same on both sides, cancel out 2 of the waters, cancel out the 4 hydroxides, and we're left with 2H2 plus O2 goes to 2H2O, which is what we said it was up there. Advantages and disadvantages of fuel cells are really important though. This is the kind of stuff you're much more likely to be asked than how to combine those 2 half equations. So I'm going to show you a page from the textbook here. So make a note of these things. So advantages of hydrogen fuel cells: they don't need to be recharged like say your Tesla does. There are no pollutants produced, there's no carbon dioxide and no pollutants produced. You can make a huge range of different sizes, and also they're more efficient actually too, so they generate electrical energy directly and they're really quite efficient. There's not much heat loss in this reaction as opposed to burning petrol, which you got a lot of heat loss, which is heat wasted. Disadvantages is that we've got highly flammable gas having to be sort of stored and carried around in these high pressure canisters. The hydrogen that's produced is not there is no hydrogen available in the atmosphere for us to just take and burn. So we have to produce the hydrogen, and that hydrogen is nearly always produced from non-renewable resources, produced from methane most often, and it's quite difficult to store. And there are toxic chemicals that are required in making these half cells too. Yeah, that's it. I think question 6 though is a really nice example of the sort of questions you might get. So in an alkaline fuel cell, name and give the formula for a suitable electrolyte, so sodium hydroxide and NaOH. The chemical reactions I was just talking about, what type of reaction, so oxidation or reduction, as I've just covered, and the other gas required, so we've just covered that. The overall balanced equation. It is possible to make other fuel cells, so with methane or methanol, and you might have to work out what those half equations are. Again, just think about the combustion of them. In fact, you're unlikely to have to do the half equations, just the overall balanced equation. So take the fuel, whether it's methanol or methane in this case, combine with oxygen to give carbon dioxide and water, then balance. And some advantages and disadvantages as I've just covered. That's it.